Golly, it's good to see you. I've been coming to Chelan for a couple of years. I remember well coming up in the summer of 1951. I came up to do a story on the lake, and I stopped off on Wooden Avenue where the chamber had a booth down there, and met a young lady, and I got my story for the paper and asked her for a date, and she said, "Okay, next Sunday I'll go. I'm glad to go out." I'd forgotten to tell her I was going to take her on a hike, but we went clear up to Hart's Pass, and I hiked her up to Slate Peak. There wasn't any road up on top then. There was a lookout up on top of Slate Peak at that time. And the view was beautiful. But all that Kathy could see was the top of the bed to lie down on. She had sandals and a skirt on. And, she never let me forget that. But she did marry me that that December of 1951 over here in the Methodist Church. So I found out that she had lots more credentials as far as history than I did. My dad didn't get into Wenatchee until '04, and my golly, her granddad, Herb Kingman, came here in the '80s with his brother Morrison. Morrison, you remember, found the Horseshoe Basin mines, he and Purcell, and then sold them for a big chunk of money, I think for $20,000, which, back in the early 90s was a lot of money. Herb was a carpenter, though. He had a boat building business over on Lakeside, built some of the early boats here on the lake, and he was also involved in the river. A group of the folks had organized the Chelan River Electric Company on the Chelan River, and had gotten the rights on the river. Well, Herb and his brother Morrison took that over in 1903, and they were lucky because 3 years later, the Great Northern decided they wanted to buy those water rights, and the Great Northern took over that Lake Chelan Electric Supply Company that Morrison and Herb had. I think they made a pretty good chunk of money out of that too. The river was important in those early years because they were thinking of electric interurbans back in the early decade, the first decade of the last century. They actually started to build one from Wenatchee to Kashmir, and I can remember seeing the grading coming out of Kashmir as we used to drive by there. But that was stopped by World War I. They couldn't get any financing. The proposal for an electric railroad from Chelan was bruited about, but the Great Northern was really the main character in those days, and they took over, and they were interested in this Chelan country. I have a brochure in my files. It says, "Outings on lovely Lake Chelan on line of the Great Northern Railroad." Now, the closest line of the Great Northern Railroad was Wenatchee. But in flowery language, they talked about lovely Lake Chelan. Let me read you what they said about it. "The trip up the Columbia on any of the comfortable steamers is in itself an interesting experience. The mighty Oregon here rolls through a land where it still hears few sounds save its own dashings. Occasionally, the steamer's whistle reverberates from shore to shore as a landing is approached. where boxes of sun-baked peaches or sacks of wheat are taken on from the valleys lying out of sight beyond the hills. But in general, the onward course of the steamer is unchecked except for the current, which in places forms rapids, animating but not dangerous. They were they were great talkers. But the Great Northern was interested in Chelan. And back when they finally built the railroad up in 1914, they bought the Field Hotel 2 years later, 1916, and put out a great big brochure about Lake Chelan. And it describes everything. And it describes where you can go and what's happening in the field. And of course, they owned the Field Hotel, so they got it both ways. Lake Chelan obviously was an attraction that was important to them. And before the railroad was completed, however, they hired an artist to paint along the Great Northern Route. A lady by the name of Abby Williams Hill was a painter that came out of the coast, and she was hired on a contract with the Great Northern in 1903 and came to Lake Chelan, painted a whole series of places up lake as well as the gorge. She also painted scenes along the Great Northern over towards Everett on Stevens Pass. Her collection, thanks to my sister, was acquired by the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma. And they produced this book about 10 years ago by Ron Field, who was the head of their art department. This was 1989. I might make a suggestion to you folks. If you could borrow some of those photographs from the University of Puget Sound, it'd make a heck of an exhibit, because Abby Williams Field was a very fine painter. She painted not only for the Great Northern, but also for the Northern Pacific for a number of different trips. She was a remarkable woman, and took her children along with her and her tents. It was a great story. Well, obviously, Chelan was a spot where people wanted to come to, including me. My dad finally bought a place in 1929, just after the lake was raised. And but Chelan also was putting out big brochures earlier on. This is about 1911. And it says, "What do the wild waves say? You will find it at Chelan." I was interested in a little piece about the roads. I will read that to you here because it was kind of interesting about what they were saying about the highways in 1911. They've got pictures of Lakeside, First Creek, and first I got to find it. But in 1911, of course, there was really not a highway up here from Wenatchee. And here's what it says. Oh, yes. A permanent sawmill is located on Bear Creek, and several portable mills are operating in different places. A great many saw logs are furnished to the mill at Chelan from this locality. A wagon and automobile road is under construction, leaving the state road on the Columbia about 12 miles below Chelan, following up Wells Coulee to First Creek, thence to the lake and along the south shore to Lakeside and Chelan. It will be the main thoroughfare from Wenatchee to the upper valley of the Columbia and Methow rivers for wagon and automobile travel. I didn't realize that Wells Coulee, or Navarre Coulee as we know it today, preceded the Knapp's Coulee Road. Knapp's Coulee, of course, had to fight Knapp's Hill, and but they finally did it, you know. Anybody remember backing up Knapp's Hill in a Model T? And the Model Ts wouldn't go up forward because the tanks wouldn't give gravity. But you could back up Knapp's Hill. It was, I think, 38 when they finally replaced that. But I remember many a trip coming up Knapp's Hill at that time. But I'm going to leave this with you folks along with that Lake Chelan brochure. You might as well have it in your collection. But I wanted to talk about a little more recent things. The development of power in this area. The first power, of course, in the whole area was of any consequence was the Rock Island Dam was started in 1929 by Puget Power. But up here, the Great Northern sold out its distribution and its rights on the Chelan River to Washington Water Power in the mid-20s. And finally, in 1927, Water Power came in and bought the rights and logged the lake and raised it 20 feet at that time. They were good citizens for the city of Wenatchee, the city of Chelan, and but about that time, we were seeing the rise of farmer interest in getting electricity to the farms. The state grange was full of very angry farmers because the private utilities of the state of Washington would not serve them without exorbitant cost. They made them pay for their own distribution out to their farms. So in 1931, finally, after exhorting the legislature to do something, the 1930 initiative was passed by the state of Washington authorizing public utility districts to be formed. And about, I think, 20-some districts in the state of Washington were formed in the mid-30s, including Chelan counties. But Chelan County, of course, didn't get into business until 1948 when Puget Power agreed to sell the Wenatchee district's distribution system to Chelan County PUD. But Water Power was not willing to sell. And so Chelan County PUD filed a condemnation suit against Washington Water Power to take the dam and the distribution system up here in 1948. And that started a battle royal in the legislature. 1948, 1950, 1952. Well, 1948 and 1950, the legislature was Democratic, and it was run by a prominent Granger from Northeast Washington by the name of Charlie Hottie. He was the head of the legislature at that time. It was the House of Representatives. And he wasn't about to let any anti-PUD legislature that can't come. But 1952 came along. You remember what 1952 was? Huh? Eisenhower was elected. Yeah. And both houses of the state of Washington went Republican. Prior to that time, the 50 folks, Harry Wall had been elected senator from Chelan County, and Harry was a strong leader in the state senate and a supporter of private power. But Harry was up against a battle in 1952 because Art Garton was going to run against him. And Art was a consummate politician and had been a supporter of the PUD and public power all over. But my Aunt Eva Anderson, by the way, did anybody here go to school to Eva?
She was my teacher in the 8th grade here.
Yeah, right. Eva was elected in 1948 to the legislature of Chelan County. She had come to Waterville in 1914 when she got married to her college sweetheart, Leonard Anderson. And they taught at Waterville for about 10 years. Then she moved to Wenatchee and was a teacher of English and dean of girls. And then her husband came up to Chelan with his partner, Charlie McGonigal, and started Mack Chevrolet. Mack was Linda Parlett's grandfather. And they had a good thing going. So Eva moved up here and started teaching school. And they tell me she was a tough teacher up here.
Yeah, I learned a lot.
I remember her telling me that she tossed a kid bodily out of class one time. Well, you wouldn't dare do that today. Eva, however, was a scholar. She had been head of the state adult teachers in Olympia, and at the same time was going back to the university to get a PhD, which she did in 1937. It was interesting because her thesis was on the equalization of taxes for school districts. You know, there are rich districts and school districts, and her thesis is on an attempt to equalize the taxes so that the schools on even poor district could do better. And her thesis was resulted in a state law that was based on what she had done in 1937. She was also appointed by Governor Langley later on to be a regent of the University of Washington. Well, back to the power story. She and Joe Lester were both strong members of the Grange. They supported local public power. She thought that the PUD ought to have all of the power facilities in Chelan County. So they got a hold of Harry Wall about a week before the election, and they called up a bunch of Grange leaders. And the Grangers said, Harry will support you in this election if you'll change your tune and support the PUD. And Harry said he would do that. Eva had a house on a hilltop just up above the Forest Service, and I was at that meeting. It was very interesting. Harry had no hesitation, and he barely won. He won by about 50 votes, and I think the publicity that the Grange gave him put him over the top. The 1953 legislature, though, was really a tough one for the PUDs because a majority of the Republicans were for private power at that time. Well, Eva was a good salesman. She finally rounded up a number of votes in the House of Representatives from non-PUD counties, enough to defeat the attempts by Washington Water Power to kill that PUD action. And 1953, she was credited by the head of the PUD Association, Ken Billington, for single-handedly being able to save the bacon for the PUDs at that time. And so, subsequent to that time, Washington Water Power agreed to sell the Chelan Dam and the distribution to Chelan County PUD. She was particularly strong in making sure that the schools were not going to suffer. And the legislature, during that period, put through a whole lot of different acts, making it the PUDs to pay in lieu of property taxes to the schools in the counties. And today, fortunately, our schools are not suffering when a public utility district takes over a private facility. Chelan County has been lucky over the years as the price of power has gone to 6 cents over in Seattle to 12 to 15 cents a kilowatt hour in California, and higher than that in Florida. We've got, what, 3.5 cents here. And Douglas County, well, we're lucky in another respect. Because when Eisenhower was elected president, his Secretary of Interior, Douglas McKay, the former governor of Oregon, became Secretary of Interior, and he decided we're going to de-emphasize federal powers. And so they deauthorized a federal dam at Priest Rapids, and said the Corps of Engineers is not going to build that. And so Grant County PUD filed on that. And they had a fight with the legislature because Governor Langley, our Republican governor at that time, this was 1943, decided that his State Power Commission should build Priest Rapids Dam. And he said, why? Grant County can't build a great big thing like that. And there was a big fight for about a year over who was going to build Priest Rapids Dam. Well, the Supreme Court finally ruled in the PUD's favor, and Grant County was given finally a license to start Priest Rapids. Kirby Billingsley, who had grown up in the daily world at that time, became PUD manager in 53, and he immediately filed on Rocky Reach Dam, and this was followed the next year by Douglas County filing on Wells Dam. Subsequently, Chelan bought from Puget Rock Island Dam and gave Puget a big bunch of power in exchange, as well as a quarter of the output to the Alco plant at Wenatchee. And today, of course, our three counties have 5 dams on the river, and this dam here at Chelan, and have more available energy to us at lower price than any other place in the whole United States. We just don't know how fortunate we are. Grant County is starting to put in a lot of electronic stuff down there. Douglas County has one in East Wenatchee, one of these big data centers. But we are fortunately in a situation where we still have surplus power and uncommitted power in Rocky Reach and Wells Dam for the future of this area. We don't know what the future will be, but we do know that we've got clean energy. It doesn't make any CO2, it doesn't pollute the atmosphere, and from now on, why, as long as I think you and I are going to live, we're going to have the benefits of a power resource that you and I, as citizens of Chelan County, own. Well, I think that's about my story about Lake Chelan and Chelan Dam. Eva moved back down to Wenatchee. By the way, she did not have an easy time of it because that same year, there over this PUD fight, there were a lot of people that still didn't like the PUD. One of them was the Chelan County Women's Republican Club. He said, we want to uphold the Republicans and American principles of franchise and curtailment of the New Deal socialization regime as represented by PUD pressure groups. You told us you would be interested in our reactions. We know if you judge by the Daily World, the Grange, the Chamber of Commerce only, you will not get a true picture of Chelan County citizens. Well, anyway, that was the Chelan County Republican Women's Club that could not persuade Eva and Joe and Harry to turn their back on the Chelan PUD. It was an interesting time. Anyway, any questions? Yeah.
What part did the REA play in this?
The REA was a separate entity, and they were used in some parts around parts of Douglas County used the REA, and so did parts of the Methow Valley. And I think there was an REA used up in the Lake Wenatchee area. The Rural Electrification Administration was a federal agency that loaned money, and so it was another attempt by the federal government, a successful one, to get power to the farmers. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, it's been a fun
Any chance ever, or what's the protocol to go through to get to be able to visit the Chelan PUD, the Chelan Dam down here? My brother worked for the PUD for a while, and he visited that dam, and he said that the workmanship in that building is phenomenal.
Well, they're rebuilding the whole dam, as you know, and they're only using one powerhouse at Chelan Dam. I don't know when it's going to be finished, but one of the reasons they held the lake up was because they only had one penstock operating and one generator at Chelan Dam. Does anybody know when they expect to finish? Next year. Yeah.
What position did the paper take on this battle between the PUD and
Oh, we were with the PUD. Oh, you betcha. The Daily World. The Daily World was for. I took over the paper in 1950, and believe me, we were waving the flag for the PUD at that time. We were called the Wenatchee Daily Worker by some people. But I would come up to Chelan, and I'd get a good meal from my mother-in-law, who was a pioneer up the Boyd district. Her name's Noe, and she grew up here in Chelan. My father-in-law, Larry, ran a lumber yard, and his son, Howard, my wife's brother. Chelan Lumber was a good place. They had a wonderful slogan, the home of good-looking men. Anyway, I have enjoyed the things that have come out of the Chelan Historical Society. I knew Jim Linston well, and I produced a little book on the history of the Holden Mine a few years ago, and you've had some great stuff coming out of Chelan here. Hackmiller's story and there's some really good stuff that Chelan was a good-sized place long before Wenatchee amounted to darn. It was like Waterville, Waterville was a big city before Wenatchee was even started. So at any rate, I recommend Ruby Williams Hill. She was a good painter. Thank you for.
Thank you very much.
Wow.
So you can go down and film forever.
Yeah, oh yeah. All right, thank you.
And get some cider.
Thanks for that.
One more thing, I'm supposed to have a chance to speak here. We'd like to keep track of everyone who takes the history notes. And I'm the editor, Mary Shearer, of the history notes, and we would love to have people write or suggest stories for the history notes. So if you're interested, let me know, or you think of something, later in the year, later in the summer, we are always willing to get suggestions and have people write for us. We can't do it all
These were used in the flat casting operation in a hot metal project.
Thanks for,
We would cast these in metal.
How did you do it?
We'd put them in a casting box or metal.
But this one has never been used.
No, no,